The morning began like many others. The city was already awake, full of noise and movement. Cars moved slowly through crowded streets. People walked fast, eyes fixed on phones or the ground. Everyone seemed busy, as if they were racing against time. In the middle of all this movement, a young woman stood near a public walkway, where many people passed every minute. She took a slow breath and reminded herself why she was there. This was not her real life, she told herself. This was just a role. Just an act. She had practiced it many times in her head. She knew where to stand, how to hold her body, how to look tired without looking dangerous. She knew how to make it feel real, but not too much. She wore simple clothes, nothing that stood out. Her shoes were worn but not torn. Her face looked calm, almost empty. She leaned slightly against a wall, as if her strength was fading. Every small detail mattered. She wanted people to believe the story she was showing them, even though it was not true. Inside, she felt distant. Her heart was steady. Her thoughts were clear. She was not nervous. This was not her first time acting in public. She had learned how to separate herself from the moment. She watched people the same way they watched her, from a safe, emotional distance. People passed by without slowing down. Some glanced at her for half a second and looked away. Some avoided eye contact completely. A few frowned, unsure of what they were seeing, but none stopped. She noticed shoes, bags, coats, and shadows more than faces. Faces were harder to remember. A group of people laughed as they walked past, talking about plans for the weekend. Another person bumped into her shoulder without saying sorry. Someone else whispered something to a friend and smiled. The world kept moving, and she stayed still, part of the background. She adjusted her posture slightly as she had planned. She let her shoulders drop. She lowered her gaze. She made her breathing slower and heavier. It was all part of the act. She knew the signs that made people believe someone was struggling. In her mind, she counted time. She had been there for several minutes now. Long enough for many people to notice, long enough for reactions to show. This part was always the same. Most people did not stop. That was expected. That was the point of the act. She told herself not to judge. People were busy. People had their own problems. It was easy to walk past someone when you did not know their story. She understood that. Or at least she thought she did. A woman slowed down near her, looked at her face, then quickly looked away and kept walking. A man checked his phone while passing, almost stepping into her space, then moved aside without a word. Each moment added another quiet note to the same familiar song. She felt nothing unusual. No anger, no sadness. Just observation. She was there to see reactions, not to feel them. That was how she stayed in control. The sun shifted slightly, changing the light on the street. A breeze moved through the area, lifting dust and paper from the ground. She felt the cool air on her skin. And focused on staying in character, she wondered briefly what people thought when they saw her. Did they think she was tired? Lost? In trouble? Or did they not think at all? These thoughts passed quickly. She pushed them aside. Thinking too much could break the act. She remembered the instructions clearly. Stay quiet. Do not ask for help. Let people decide on their own. The goal was to see who would notice without being asked. Minutes passed. Her legs began to feel stiff from standing in one place. She shifted her weight slightly, careful not to overdo it. Everything had to look natural. Real struggle was often quiet. She noticed a child pull on a parent's hand and point in her direction. The parent gently pulled the child along, whispering something she could not hear. The child looked back once more before disappearing into the crowd. That moment stayed with her longer than the others. Not because it hurt, but because it felt honest. Children noticed things adults learned to ignore. She took another slow breath. The act continued. A loud sound from the street made her flinch for a moment, but she quickly recovered. She had trained herself well. Acting in public required discipline. One mistake could change how people reacted. Her mind drifted to past performances. Different places, similar results. Many people. Few stops. She had accepted this pattern as normal. It no longer surprised her. She told herself that this was not about hope. It was about reality. About understanding how people behaved when no one was watching them closely. That belief helped her stay calm. She checked the time in her head again. Still early. She would stay longer. Another group passed. Someone slowed down, hesitated, then kept walking. That hesitation was interesting. It meant something had reached them, even if they chose not to act on it. She wondered what stopped them. Fear? Uncertainty? The worry of being late? She would never know. Most stories stayed unfinished. Her eyes followed the movement of the crowd without focusing on anyone in particular. She let her expression remain neutral, tired, distant. She did not expect anything different that day. She did not expect anyone to truly stop. That belief made everything easier. She thought of the act as a mirror. People saw themselves in it, whether they realized it or not. She was just holding the mirror up. Her feet hurt slightly now. She ignored it. Discomfort helped make the act more real. A shadow fell across the ground in front of her. She did not look up right away. Shadows came and went all the time. The sound of footsteps slowed nearby. She noticed it, but did not react. Many people slowed before deciding to walk on. She kept her eyes down, her body still. This was still part of the act. She had no idea that something was about to change. At that moment, she was still just acting. She was still in control. She still believed she understood how the world worked. She did not yet know that one small pause, one quiet choice from a stranger would begin to touch something real inside her, for now. She stood there, surrounded by noise and motion, playing her role perfectly, waiting without hope, without fear, and without knowing that this time would be different. She noticed the pause before she noticed the person. It was different from the others. Most people slowed for a second and moved on. This pause stayed. It lingered in the air like a held breath. She felt it before she lifted her eyes. A pair of shoes stood a short distance in front of her. Not rushing. Not turning away. Just there. She kept her gaze low, staying in character. That was part of the rule. Let the other person speak first. Let them decide what to do. Seconds passed. They felt longer than usual. She heard a quiet clearing of the throat. Not loud, not demanding attention. Just enough to say someone was there. "Are you okay?" a voice asked. The words were simple. There was no sharp edge to them. No rush. No judgment. Just a question spoken the way someone speaks when they truly want an answer. She had heard questions before, but usually they were quick, almost forced. This one was different. She stayed silent for a moment as she was supposed to. Her role allowed for hesitation. People in trouble often hesitated. "Yes," she said softly, then stopped herself. That sounded too sure. She adjusted. "I think so." The person didn't interrupt, didn't correct her, didn't push. "That's good," the voice said. "I just wanted to check." Most people would leave after that. She had seen it happen many times. A quick check to ease their conscience, then gone. But the shoes didn't move. She could feel the presence, steady and calm. It made her uncomfortable in a way she wasn't used to. Not unsafe, just... Notice she lifted her eyes slightly, enough to see the person standing there. Not too close. Not too far. Hands relaxed at the sides. Face open. No phone in hand. No hurry in the body. "I'm fine," she added, sticking closer to the script. The person nodded but didn't turn away. "If you're sure," the voice said. "You look like you might need a minute." Minute. That word landed. Somewhere inside her, people usually offered solutions, advice, money, directions. This person offered time. "I just needed to rest," she replied. "That makes sense," came the answer. Long days can be heavy. She wasn't ready for that. The sentence was simple, but it carried understanding. Not pity, not assumption. Just recognition. She felt her guard tighten without her choosing to. Acting suddenly felt harder. The crowd continued to flow around them. People walked between them and the street. Sounds rose and fell. But the small space where they stood felt quiet. The person shifted slightly, not leaving, but making room. "Do you want some water?" the voice asked. She shook her head quickly. "Too quickly now, thank you." Okay, double quotes again, no pressure. She realized something then. This person wasn't trying to fix her, wasn't trying to feel good about themselves. They were simply there. That was new. Her heart beat a little faster. She didn't like surprises. Acting worked best when everything was expected. "You don't have to talk," the person said, as if reading her tension. "I just didn't want to walk past." Those words were not dramatic. They were said quietly, almost like a confession. She swallowed. Most people did walk past. She nodded. "I'm sure what else to do." "Thank you," she said. The person smiled, but it wasn't a wide smile. It didn't ask for anything in return. "I'll stay here for a bit," the voice said. "If that's okay?" She hesitated. This was not part of the plan. No one stayed. "That's fine," she answered, choosing the safest response. They stood there together, not speaking. The silence wasn't awkward. It felt natural, like sitting on a bench with someone and watching the world pass. She became very aware of herself, of her breathing, of the way her shoulders were still dropped, of the tired look she was holding. For the first time that day, she felt seen not as a role, but as a person. That thought scared her. She reminded herself again. This is just acting. But the reminder didn't settle her like it usually did. The person glanced at the street, then back at her. "Busy place," they said. She nodded. "Hard to stop sometimes," the voice continued. "Feels like if you stop, everything will pile up." She didn't answer right away, because that sentence was true in ways the act had never touched before. "Guess," she said quietly. Another pause followed. The person didn't look at their phone, didn't sigh, didn't show impatience. She felt something loosen inside her chest. Just a little. She thought about how long it had been since someone stood with her without needing a reason. The acting line between her role and herself began to blur. She adjusted her stance. "And this time it wasn't planned? You really don't need anything?" the person asked gently. She opened her mouth to answer automatically. Her voice caught. It surprised her. She closed her mouth and tried again. "I'm okay," she said. But it sounded thinner now, the person noticed. She could tell by the way their eyes softened, not sharpened. "All right," they said. "I'll be right here anyway." Something about that stayed with her. Right here, not nearby. Not around. Here the city noise kept going. People kept passing. Time moved, but the act she had built so carefully began to feel fragile. She wasn't crying, not yet, but for the first time since she had arrived. Her eyes burned and she didn't know why. She looked down, afraid her face might give her away. She told herself to stay focused. This was still part of the act, but somewhere deep inside, something real had started to wake up. The young woman felt the weight of the quiet presence in front of her. It was not heavy or imposing, but steady and calm. She was not used to this. Most people who noticed her either offered quick words and walked away, or stared for a moment and judged her. This was different. There was no judgment, no rush, no expectation. Just attention. She felt a strange mixture of relief and discomfort. Relief because someone had genuinely paused. Discomfort because she was not supposed to feel anything. She was only acting. That was the rule she had repeated to herself countless times. Acting required distance. Acting required control. Real emotion was dangerous in a public performance. Yet, as the minutes passed, she felt her control slipping. She tried to focus on the act, leaning slightly, lowering her gaze, keeping her breathing slow and steady. But the presence of this one person made it impossible to remain fully detached. The person didn't speak much. That was part of what made it different. Words were sparse, gentle, carefully chosen. When they did speak, they listened as much as they talked. They offered comfort without trying to fix anything. They showed patience instead of curiosity. This was not a conversation designed to end quickly. It was simply a space, a pause, a human being with another human being, without the need for drama or spectacle. She shifted slightly on her feet. Her body had been tense, holding the strain of the act. She realized she had been unconsciously bracing herself, expecting judgment or indifference. But this person's presence did not require her to brace. They simply allowed her to exist in that moment, in that space, without pressure. She felt her heart beat faster. It was subtle at first, just a quickening in her chest, but it continued, steadying itself in a rhythm that made her feel more alive and more vulnerable than she had expected. She reminded herself again, this is acting. Keep control. Nothing here is real, but she could feel reality bleeding in. Her act, which had always been a mirror reflecting the world around her, was starting to reflect herself. She noticed small things, the way her shoulders felt stiff, the slight tension in her jaw, the dryness in her throat. All these sensations were part of her, not the act. And for the first time that day, she acknowledged them. The person made no sudden movements. They simply stayed in their space, offering a calm stability that seemed to anchor her. Their hands were relaxed, their shoulders soft, their gaze attentive without being intrusive. There was no judgment in their eyes, no hint of annoyance, no rush to move on. Just presence. She thought about the people who had passed her before. The ones who glanced and moved on, who avoided her gaze, who whispered to their friends. She realized that she had grown accustomed to their indifference. It had become normal, expected, even safe. But this presence was different. It was unpredictable, and that made it feel dangerous in a way she had never felt during her acts. She wanted to retreat, to pull herself back into the safety of her role. But the longer she stayed, the more she felt a curiosity rising within her. Who was this person? Why were they different from everyone else? Why did they not turn away? The person spoke again, their voice quiet but clear. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. I just wanted to be here. Those words struck her deeply. No one had ever just been there. Not like this. People always expected something in return. A smile, a nod, a story. But this was different. No expectation. No demand. Just being. Her throat tightened. She tried to swallow, tried to steady herself, but she could feel a small lump forming. She was not crying yet, but she could feel the emotion building behind her eyes. The act that had always kept her safe was starting to feel fragile. She shifted her weight again, unsure if she should continue the act or let it falter. She chose to stay still, letting the tension remain, letting the silence stretch. The person did not comment on her hesitation. They simply waited. The crowd moved around them, oblivious to the quiet exchange taking place in the middle of the street. Cars honked, people shouted to each other, footsteps clattered, but in that small space, time seemed to slow. It was as if the world had paused to let this human connection breathe. She noticed small details she hadn't before. The way the person's eyes softened when they noticed her subtle gestures. The slight tilt of their head when they listened. The calm rhythm of their breathing. Every small detail made the space feel warmer, safer, more real. She realized she was beginning to let go of the strict control she always maintained. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Her breathing became less deliberate. Her gaze, though still lowered, softened. She was still acting, but the act was becoming intertwined with something real, something raw. The person spoke again, more softly this time. It's okay to take a moment. You don't have to pretend everything is fine all the time. Those words were simple, yet they carried a weight that she hadn't anticipated. She had spent so long hiding behind her acts, behind the mask of control. She had forgotten what it felt like to simply exist without performance. To be seen without judgment, she felt warmth rising in her chest, a mixture of gratitude, surprise, and relief. It was overwhelming in its subtlety. She had been prepared for indifference, for passing glances, for hurried concern. She had not been prepared for genuine, patient kindness. She took a small, unsteady breath. The act she had rehearsed so carefully began to unravel. Her emotions, which she had kept carefully compartmentalized, started to surface. She felt a tear prick at the corner of her eye, but she blinked it away, unsure whether to allow herself to feel or continue pretending. The person did not speak again immediately. They simply maintained their presence, steady and patient, without pushing, without offering solutions, without trying to control the moment. They gave her space, and in that space, she felt something opening within her. She realized that this simple act of kindness, pausing, listening, being present was more powerful than anything she had encountered during her public performances. It was not grand or dramatic, but it was profoundly human. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to notice her own vulnerability. The exhaustion, the tension, the hidden fears, all of it surfaced quietly. She realized that she had been carrying more than the act itself. She had been carrying years of learning to hide, to protect herself, to maintain distance. And now, for the first time in a long while, she felt a crack in that armor. The presence of this person, their quiet attention and unwavering patience, had begun to break through the walls she had built. She looked down, feeling the tears she had tried to hold back. She did not wipe it away. She did not try to compose herself. She simply let it sit there, small and unnoticed by the crowd, but profoundly significant to her. The person noticed the subtle change, but they did not comment. They did not force her to speak, did not attempt to comfort her with words or gestures. They simply remained steady and present, allowing her to experience the moment fully. She felt a mixture of fear and relief. Fear because letting go was unfamiliar and exposed her to feelings she had long kept hidden. Relief because, for the first time in a long time, she did not have to act alone. Someone had chosen to be there, without reason, without demand. She realized that true kindness did not require recognition. It did not need a response. It did not demand gratitude. It simply existed, quietly and patiently, and that was enough to make her heart stir. The act she had started that morning was meant to measure reactions, to observe human behavior, to play a role. But in the presence of this simple, steady kindness, the act had transformed. It was no longer just a performance. It was an encounter. A moment of genuine human connection that was slowly reshaping her. Understanding of trust and empathy. She allowed herself to breathe more freely, to feel the tension release from her shoulders, to let the lump in her throat ease slightly. She was still acting, but she was also beginning to live in the moment. The boundary between the act and reality blurred. She realized that she had been unprepared for the impact of genuine care. Minutes passed. She was no longer counting them. She was no longer trying to control her posture or her expression. She was simply present, aware of the small, profound difference that one human being's attention could make. She thought about the people who had passed. Her, earlier that morning, who had ignored her, who had looked away, who had whispered to friends. She felt no anger, no resentment. Instead, she felt gratitude for the contrast. It made the presence of this one person even more meaningful. It made her see how rare, how precious, simple kindness could be. She realized that her act had always been about observation, about seeing how people behaved under the smallest of pressures. But now, she was experiencing something she had never studied before, the effect of genuine care, of patient presence, of attention without expectation. Her heart continued to beat a little faster, a rhythm of awareness and awakening. She did not try to control it. She let it guide her, let it remind her that there were moments in life that could pierce the armor she had built, that could reach into the places she had long kept closed. And in that moment, she understood something fundamental. Kindness, even in its quietest form, had the power to reach where words, acts, and performances could not. It had the power to touch the core of a person, to awaken emotion, to break through walls built over years of self-protection. She allowed herself a small, tentative smile, barely noticeable, but real. She did not speak. She did not need to. The moment was enough. The presence of this person, their quiet kindness, had begun to change her, had begun to make her see that there was a possibility of connection that she had long forgotten. The city moved around them, indifferent as ever, but in this small space. In this brief encounter, something significant had shifted. She felt it in the tightness of her chest, in the warmth of her heart. In the awareness of her own vulnerability, she realized that the act she had begun that morning, her chest felt tight as she stood there, aware of her own heartbeat and the quiet presence of the person beside her. The act she had started that morning, which had always kept her at a distance from others, was now unraveling slowly. She was no longer fully in control, and part of her felt afraid of that. She had trained herself to remain composed, to hold emotions in check, to observe without being touched. But that control was slipping. A subtle warmth spread through her, a mix of relief and vulnerability. She realized how long it had been since anyone had just paused for her, without reason, without expectation. She felt seen in a way she wasn't prepared for, and the feeling stirred something inside her she had tried to bury under years of habits and acting. Her lips trembled slightly, and she instinctively looked down, afraid that the emotion would show. The stranger, noticing her hesitation, did not press, did not speak, did not attempt to draw her out of her silence. They simply remained calm, patient, unwavering. Their quiet presence was stronger than words. It was a shelter in the middle of the noise of the city. She shifted on her feet, unsure what to do next. Part of her wanted to retreat back into her act, to regain the distance that had kept her safe for so long. Another part of her, a smaller part that had been dormant, wanted to lean into this feeling, to allow herself to be affected by the simple, unexpected kindness of a stranger. Her throat tightened. She could feel tears forming, unbidden and unplanned. This was not supposed to happen. She had rehearsed scenarios in her head 1,000 times, but none of them accounted for genuine human empathy. The walls she had built around herself began to crumble. She realized how fragile she had been under the layers of performance. She began, but her voice faltered. The words would not come out cleanly. She cleared her throat and tried again, but it sounded weak even to her own ears. The stranger tilted their head slightly, just enough to show attention, not judgment. That simple acknowledgement encouraged her to try again. "I don't know why this is hitting me so much," she admitted softly, almost to herself. She tried to laugh, a nervous, shaky sound. But it only made her chest tighten more. The stranger nodded, not with surprise, not with pity, just with understanding. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their silent companionship was enough to let her emotions surface. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting a single tear fall. One small, unrestrained tear that carried all the weight of exhaustion, isolation, and years of practiced detachment. She had not cried like this in a long time. Maybe not ever in the presence of another person. The act she had been performing, the control she had relied on, melted in that instant. Her shoulders sagged, the tension in her body releasing slightly. Her breathing became irregular as she tried to regain composure, but she allowed herself the indulgence of just feeling. She was not pretending anymore. She was not acting. She was simply existing, and that was enough. The stranger's calm, patient presence continued. They did not attempt to soothe her, did not offer words of comfort, did not gesture. They simply waited, letting her process her emotions in her own way. And that patience, that quiet steadfastness, made the tears flow more freely, because it was safe to let them fall. She thought about how unusual this was, how rare it was to encounter someone who simply stayed, who simply allowed another person to feel without interference. Most people either rushed to fix problems or hurried away. This person had chosen neither. They had chosen simply to be. The city continued around them. Cars honked, footsteps clattered, voices rose and fell, but all of it seemed distant. The small space where they stood had become its own world, a bubble of quiet, a haven for raw, unguarded human emotion. She let herself remember things she had long kept hidden. Times when she had felt invisible, unnoticed, when she had wanted attention but had never dared to ask. Moments of fear, of doubt, of loneliness that she had tucked away behind smiles and laughter and practiced composure. All of it surfaced quietly, gently, as if the act had peeled away the protective layers. Her tears fell more freely now, and she did not try to stop them. She did not turn away. She allowed herself to be vulnerable, to be human. In the presence of someone who had offered nothing but their presence, the stranger finally spoke again, their voice soft and unhurried. It's okay. It's all right to feel this. The simplicity of the words struck her deeply. No lecture, no advice, no judgment. Just permission to exist as she was. She let herself inhale deeply, feeling her chest expand and contract. Acknowledging her own humanity, her own emotions, she looked up at the stranger, meeting their gaze for the first time fully. There was no condescension in their eyes, no pity, just a quiet recognition, an acknowledgement that she was there, fully present, fully human. It was a gaze that accepted her without expectation. A second tear escaped, sliding down her cheek, and she did not wipe it away. It was a sign of release, a breaking of the walls she had spent so long building. She had been acting for others, for herself, for control, but in this moment, none of that mattered. Only the raw human experience mattered. The stranger offered a gentle nod, silent affirmation that she could continue to feel, continue to exist without fear. And in that small gesture, she found strength. Not the strength of control, but the strength of acceptance, of letting herself be seen without pretense. Minutes passed, but it felt longer. She was no longer counting, no longer observing, no longer performing. She was simply present. The act had transformed into a real encounter, a genuine interaction, a meeting of two humans in the middle of a busy city, yet apart from it, her tears slowed. But the emotion remained, a warm ache in her chest. She felt lighter, unburdened, as if the simple act of someone standing with her, of allowing her to feel, had lifted a weight she had carried unknowingly for years. She wanted to speak, to express gratitude, but the words felt inadequate. She settled for a small smile, barely perceptible, but honest. The stranger smiled back, not wide, not dramatic, just a soft acknowledgement, a quiet communion. She realized then that this encounter was a turning point. It was more than an act, more than a test, more than a performance. It was a moment that would stay with her, a memory of kindness without expectation, of patience without demand, of human connection in its simplest, most profound form. The city continued to move around them, oblivious to the small miracle that had taken place on its crowded streets. But she did not mind. She had been touched by something rare and powerful, something that would change how she understood herself and others. She felt gratitude swell within her, not in the theatrical sense, not as part of the act, but genuine, heartfelt gratitude for a stranger who had chosen to be kind, who had chosen to simply be. And in that gratitude, she found hope, not loud or dramatic, but quiet and enduring, a hope that kindness could still exist, and that one person could make a profound difference in another's life. She wiped the remaining tears from her cheeks and breathed deeply. The act was over in her mind, but the impact remained. She understood now that the smallest gestures could carry the heaviest weight, and that true empathy required nothing more than presence and attention. As the stranger finally prepared to move on, she realized she didn't need them to stay forever. The lesson, the moment, the gift of quiet human kindness had been given, and she carried it with her. It had changed her, strengthened her, and opened her heart in a way that no act, no performance, no rehearsal could ever achieve. She watched as the stranger walked away, blending into the crowd, yet leaving a lasting imprint on her soul. The city remained loud, busy, indifferent, but she felt a quiet peace within herself, a sense of being seen and understood that would remain long after the street had returned to normal. She stood there for a moment longer, breathing in deeply, feeling the world move around her. But now, with a new perspective, she had been acting, yes, but through that act, she had encountered real human connection. And that, she realized, was far more powerful than anything she had imagined. The city carried on around her, full of movement and noise, but she felt a quietness inside that had not been there before. The encounter with the stranger had left an imprint she could not ignore. It was not dramatic or flashy, but subtle and enduring. A gentle shift in the way she viewed herself and the world around her. She stood where she had been, taking slow, deliberate breaths, feeling the pulse of her own heartbeat, She realized that she had been holding so much in, carrying layers of pretense and control that had shielded her from both pain and connection. Now, after the simple act of someone pausing to care, those layers were loosening, and she could finally feel the depth of her own humanity. The tear tracks on her cheeks had dried, but the memory of the release remained. She felt lighter, unburdened, as if the simple acknowledgement from a stranger had allowed her to reclaim something she had long forgotten. The ability to be vulnerable and still be safe. She thought about the act she had been performing that morning. It had been a controlled experiment, a way to see how people would react, to test the world and her own assumptions about it. She had been prepared for indifference, for fleeting glances, for avoidance. But what had actually happened had been something entirely different. It had been real, unscripted, alive. The stranger had not demanded anything from her. They had not asked for gratitude, explanation, or repayment. They had simply stood, simply waited, simply acknowledged her existence without judgment. That was enough. It was more than enough. It had changed her perception of what human connection could be. She allowed herself a small smile. Genuine this time, unpracticed and unplanned. It was a quiet smile, but it carried a weight of understanding and gratitude. She realized that kindness, even in its simplest form, could have profound effects. It could pierce through walls, touch hidden places in the heart, and awaken feelings that had long been suppressed. Her thoughts drifted to the crowd around her. People hurried past, caught up in their own lives, their own struggles, oblivious to the small but significant encounter that had taken place. She wondered if anyone would notice her change. If anyone could sense the shift inside her? Probably not. But that did not matter. The effect was for her, not for them. She felt a quiet determination rise within her. She did not know why she felt it, but she knew she wanted to carry this moment with her. To remember that patience, attention, and simple presence could have power beyond measure. That the smallest gestures, often unnoticed, could create ripples that lasted far longer than the moment itself. She took a step forward, her feet moving lightly on the pavement. The city remained loud and busy, but she felt as though she were walking in a different rhythm, one attuned to the quiet power of human connection. Each step felt deliberate, as if she were walking with a newfound awareness of the small things, the subtle exchanges, the kindnesses that often went unnoticed. Her mind wandered back to the stranger's words. Soft and gentle, unforced, simple in their delivery, but profound in their impact. It's okay to feel this. Those words had unlocked a door she had long kept closed. They had given her permission to experience emotion without fear, to acknowledge her vulnerability without shame. They had reminded her that being seen, truly seen, was not dangerous, but healing. She thought about the tears she had cried, the raw, unplanned emotion that had surfaced when she had least expected it. She realized that crying had not been a weakness, but a release, a reclamation of her humanity. The act had ended, but the experience had opened a door she did not want to close again. She walked through the city streets, each step carrying a lightness she had not felt in years. Her mind was calm, her heart open, her awareness heightened. She noticed the small things, the flutter of a bird's wings, the laughter of a child, the warmth of the sun on her skin. Each detail was sharper, more vivid, more meaningful. She felt present in a way she had not allowed herself to be before. Her thoughts returned to the stranger, now gone, blending into the crowd, yet leaving a lasting impression. She wondered if they knew the impact they had made, if they realized that their quiet presence had transformed a moment, had shifted a perspective, had awakened something long dormant. She doubted it. That was the beauty of it. They had done it without expectation, without desire for recognition, without knowing the power of their action. And that was why it had been so genuine, so profound. She reflected on the act she had come to perform. Initially, it had been about observing reactions, testing boundaries, seeing the world through a lens of detachment. But what had occurred was something far richer, far more instructive. She had observed not just the world, but herself. She had learned the value of presence, the strength and patience, the transformative power of kindness. She realized that this encounter had taught her more about humanity than any experiment, any act, any rehearsal ever could. It had reminded her that empathy did not require grand gestures, that understanding did not require words, that connection did not require explanation. Sometimes it only required attention, presence, and a willingness to stand quietly with another human being. The city moved around her, still bustling, still loud, still indifferent in its vastness. But she had changed. Her awareness had shifted. Her heart had opened. She felt a quiet confidence that she had not known before, a sense of belonging, not dependent on others' recognition, but rooted in the understanding that small acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways beyond measure. She continued to walk, each step reinforcing the lesson she had learned. She noticed people with new eyes, seeing the small gestures they gave and received, appreciating moments she would have previously ignored. She felt a gentle warmth of gratitude toward the stranger, toward the world, toward the possibility that such simple human actions could create profound meaning. Her mind wandered to the future, wondering how she might carry this lesson forward, how she could offer the same quiet presence to someone else, how she could recognize the impact of small kindnesses, how she could remain open to connection even when fear and habit urged her to withdraw. She felt a quiet determination to remember, to act, to be present. She allowed herself to feel fully, to embrace the vulnerability that had once scared her. She felt the strength in her own sensitivity, the courage in her openness, the beauty in her capacity to be affected by simple, honest human gestures. She realized that being human meant feeling deeply, responding authentically, and allowing oneself to be transformed by others' actions. The sun began to shift, casting longer shadows across the city's streets. She noticed the change in light, the subtle colors, the way the world continued its rhythm around her, but she moved through it differently now. Each sound, each movement, each encounter held potential significance, potential connection. She walked with awareness, with patience, with openness. She thought about the act she had begun, the experiment, the performance. She realized that its purpose had changed. No longer about testing others, it had become about testing herself. She had learned to observe her own reactions, to recognize her own emotions, to acknowledge her own vulnerability. And she had learned that genuine kindness, even from a stranger, could touch her more deeply than she had ever anticipated. Her steps carried her through streets and avenues, past the noise and chaos, through the ordinary life of the city, yet within her was something extraordinary, a sense of connection, a sense of understanding, a sense of peace. She carried the memory of that quiet, patient stranger with her, not as a burden, but as a gift, a reminder, a lesson etched into her heart. She paused for a moment, looking around at the people rushing past, at the endless flow of life, at the indifference that often masked deep struggles. She felt empathy rising within her, a quiet, powerful empathy for the unseen, unheard, and acknowledged moments that each person carried. She recognized the potential for kindness, for understanding, for presence, in every fleeting encounter, and she smiled, a full, genuine smile this time, not forced, not cautious, but open and real. She realized that she had been transformed. The act, the experiment, the performance had ended, but the lesson remained. She had been touched by human kindness in its simplest, most profound form, and it had changed her. She continued walking, carrying with her the understanding that the smallest gestures could create the deepest impact, that genuine attention could heal unseen wounds, and that being fully present, fully human, was the greatest gift she could offer herself and others. The city remained loud and busy, but within her was a quiet, enduring peace, a sense of connection, and a newfound hope for the beauty of ordinary human moments.